The launch of the Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index is bringing together top government officials, development partners, and key players in the economic sector to put forward the findings of the survey. The survey, which sampled over 56,000 households across the 36 states of the Federation and the FCT, conducted between November 2021 and February 2022, states that 65% of poor Nigerians, representing 86 million people, live in the north, while 35%, nearly 47 million, live in the south.
While the monetary measurement of poverty makes use of consumption expenditure as a means of determining the level of poverty, the MPI approach uses deprivation in basic amenities as a means of determining the level of poverty.
At the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, we will continue to play our oversight role as the government's institution tasked with policy and project designs, as well as the monitoring and evaluation of projects. In this context, the MPI will be used to systematically track progress against the Sustainable Development Goal 1.
The measure used to calculate the figure was based on the Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index, MPI, and contains 5 components: health, living standard, education, security, and underemployment. While the report identifies Sokoto State as having the most poverty levels across states with 91%, and Ondo with the lowest at 27%, children, women, and persons living with disabilities are worst hit. The figures come with concerns from development partners.
We need to understand poverty as a phenomenon that is affecting children in different ways, whether it is monetary or multidimensional.
However, the federal government says more investments will be made to change the narrative.
This is a report that pinpoints the level of deprivations and its intensity that confronts our citizens, all of them. Beyond this, it also provides substantive evidence of the positive impact of the multi-sectoral interventions of the Buhari administration, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which also demonstrated our commitment to eradicating extreme poverty in Nigeria.
The survey is then launched. This is expected to serve as a wake-up call to the government on how to allocate its resources and provide policies that will address the gaps identified.
But when I listened to the applause at the launch of that survey, you know that they were not exactly clapping for the figures in the survey, because what was being launched was quite distressing. It was the fact that they had been able to at least do some work. At least we know how many Nigerians are poor and what to expect. But this is about the first time a lot of Nigerians are hearing about multidimensional poverty. What is it? And how did we arrive at the figures this morning? Well, we're joined by Mr. Adeyemi Adeniran, who is the Statistician General and the CEO of the National Bureau of Statistics, the NBS. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And we also have with us Mr. Jacob Dirksen, who is the Research and Policy Officer at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, at the University of Oxford. You're welcome as well.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Good morning. So I'm not certain if we have done such a report before. I mean, that talks about multidimensional poverty. Oftentimes, yes, when we talk about poverty, we seem to speak of it in general terms. But can you tell us precisely what do you mean by multidimensional poverty?
Thank you. We have made attempts to compute multidimensional poverty index for Nigeria. In 2018, we conducted multidimensional poverty index survey, but not as a stand-alone. That was conducted to serve as input into the Human Development Index that is usually computed by the United Nations Development Program. The 2022 round of the MPI is a standalone that have data at national, state, and senatorial district level. What MPI does is to shift away from the monetary approach to compute poverty, to look at deprivations that household and individual within the household suffer that lead them into poverty. So we look at 4 dimensions of deprivations: the health, education, living standard, and works and shock. So these are the 4 dimensions that we ask people within the household whether they are deprived or not deprived in those 4 dimensions. From these
Health,
4 dimensions,
living standards,
health, education, living standard, and works and shock. Work in terms of employment, unemployed, unemployment, and shock, security shock.
Security shocks.
Security
okay.
shocks.
Okay.
So these are the 4 dimensions that we look at. And we have about 15 indicators across these 4 dimensions.
For how long did this survey go on? Because some people might say that depending on when it started, it's possible that maybe some of the data might have changed.
So we started November 2021. That's the actual data collection, and end by February 2022. The planning started during the lockdown of COVID-19 with our key stakeholders. We started the discussion and the planning, but when the lockdown was eased, so we started the training at the headquarters and at the state level. Then the actual data collection started in November 2021, and then we ended it by February 2022 for about 45 days thereabouts.
Well, 133 million Nigerians, that is certainly not a pretty figure. We know that in 2019, the Buhari administration did commit to lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty over the next 10 years. I think also containing the executive summary of this report, they already did the math that if you're going to do that, you need to be lifting at least 10 million people out of poverty every year. So for you, when, you know, this, because I know you did collaborate with the NBS on this one, when you saw these figures coming in, 133 million Nigerians, what did that spell for you?
So no matter what the number is, launching any poverty report, seeing any poverty numbers is always a sad thing. So no matter what the final figure is, it's always shocking. It's always a call for action. And I think that's the one key takeaway also that we have from this report, the multidimensional poverty index for Nigeria, and this number, including all of the analysis that we have in the report, are a policy tool that the government can use to bring that number down. So as shocking as these figures are, the hope now, of course, is that local governments, district level governments, state governments, and of course also the national government, the federal government, can use the analysis that is provided and can use the multidimensional poverty index as a tool to actually achieve their pledge to lift 100 million out of poverty.
I know that poverty indexes have always been somewhat a bit controversial, even within the world of development. There are those who argue that what will be considered poverty, you know, in some areas might not be considered poverty in some other areas, and there have always been some controversy over what index should be used. How are you able to arrive at a general index suitable to all parts of Nigeria?
So the Statistician General might be able to more fully comment on this, but we've done a lot of conversations with stakeholders across the country. We had a validation workshop just a few months ago here in Abuja, where the state statisticians and representatives from all states came together. They looked at what we have done and they provided their inputs, and at the end they all validated that this index and these numbers are something that they can take away as figure that they also want to use at the state level. We know that some governors and some states are very eager actually to use what the great effort that NBS and other colleagues here have brought us in this report and make use of it for local and state level policy making. You're right, it's always a compromise at a national level, but in order to have one tool that can drive policy from the national down to the local government level, a lot of effort has really gone into seeking the views of stakeholders and make sure that, you know, the deprivation indicators that are incorporated in this measure really speak to realities across the country.
It's a good thing to know that, you know, the statisticians at the state levels are also quite involved and they are aware of what it is that you have been able to come up with. I'm looking at, you know, these figures and, you know, I hope it's not a thing of something that's going to cause controversy, because sometimes when resources, scarce resources are about to be allocated, because from what we have heard now, this is going to be part of the, well, I say the basis for allocation of resources in terms of dealing with the issues. Do you think that any problems could come from there? Maybe some people will, I do not know. Do you see any problems arising out of that particular solution, which should be the natural thing, but which we know oftentimes when politics is involved, it's no longer so straightforward?
Yeah. I don't foresee problem in the application of the result of MPI in resource allocation because it is, as we said, it's a policy tool that we expect both the federal government and the state government to use in the allocation of resources and to come up with programs that will help lifting people out of poverty at the state level in particular. When we talk about education, so what the result from the education sector is saying is that the Ministry of Education at the state level need to take the result, and this has been disaggregated up to senatorial district level and the local government within the senatorial district. So they can take the result and say, at this particular area of the state, what we need to address if we want to lift people out of poverty is education. In another senatorial district, it could be health, that rather than building schools that is not putting people in poverty at that particular senatorial district, it is issue of health. Then the state government need to face the issue of health in that particular senatorial district. So it won't cause any controversy. And for the federal government has already started the implementation and the usage of the result of the MPI. The MPI is one of the tools that the government is using to drive the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. And in that plan, it is stated that government will lift 34 million people out of poverty by the end of the 2025. So this is...
That's the target.
That's the target in the midterm National Development Plan of government. And they are using the result of the MPI to drive that, looking at the health sector, looking at the education sector, looking at the living standard in terms of infrastructure available to the people, as well as the shocks, security shocks, where it is happening in the country, to be able to address it. So both at the federal and state level, I don't see it as being controversial for any government that really want to work and lift people out of poverty.
It is interesting. Well, for the appreciation of our viewers, we've been able to put a few slides together. I think it'll be important for them to just take a look at it again. Let's look at the very first one. We're talking about multidimensional poverty index. From what we can see, yes, 133 million Nigerians live in poverty. Figure represents 65%, a whopping 65% of the nation's population. Over 56,610 households surveyed. 65% of poor Nigerians live in the north. 35% of poor Nigerians live in the south. So that's the first one, multidimensional poverty. If you're looking at the components used in calculating the MPI, you have health. Well, the MBS chief just emphasized that health, living standards, education, security, and underemployment. Those are some of the components used in calculating the MPI. You also see that Sokoto has the highest poverty rate at 91%. Ondo has lowest poverty rate at 27%. Children, women, and people living with disabilities are most affected. So these are some of the highlights of the multi-dimensional poverty index report recently launched. I want to talk a little about the fact that children were also counted separately. I know that you have, there was a survey done in terms of households, but why was it very important to also, capture children more specifically as a different, well, I say demographic, because the fact that children exactly cannot work, and whatever poverty they feel is as a result of the poverty of their parents. Do you have an answer for that, Jacob?
So the Nigeria MPI 2022 comes with a linked child MPI, so multidimensional poverty index exclusively for children. And that one is one of the efforts that NBS and the government of Nigeria are undertaking now to focus attention on the deprivations faced by the youngest in the population, which is really key in order to make sure that intergenerational cycles of poverty and deprivation are being broken. We know that deprivations that young humans, the children in our societies face at a very early age will continue to affect them and then later on their families and their immediate environments for the rest of their lives. So focusing on the deprivations that these youngest Nigerians face is again something that provides us with a great tool to make sure that we can target the deprivations they are most affected by in order to prevent this continuation of deprivation across generations and across the life cycle.
Well, it's interesting to note that the let's say, promise of the pledge of the president to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty came in 2019. That was pre-COVID. Yeah. At that time, we did not realize that, a pandemic such as COVID was going to come. But then eventually it came. And I think that part of the reason why you started this was to perhaps also see the effect of COVID on, poverty levels that were already high pre-COVID. So how much would you say, it might be difficult to estimate now, but how much of an effect would you say that COVID has had on the poverty levels of families within Nigeria?
So there are many factors that have affected the household in Nigeria after the 2018-2019 Nigerian Living Standard Survey, which we use monetary approach to estimate poverty, as at that time, when we have 82.9 million Nigerians, which represent 40.1% of the total population, as at that time. And that was 2018-2019. The result was actually released during the COVID period in 2020. So thereafter, the pandemic came. After that, we have issue of insecurity in the north, extended to northwest, which also affect the life of people leaving their home, not able to work in the farm. After that, the issue of banditry came, when people cannot go to farm again. So it's not only COVID that have actually affected the Nigerian households and their citizens from 2019, 2018, up to the time that we release this result. So the pandemic lockdown is there, and this thing has a long-term effect. It's not something that you can see immediately, but it's a sporadic event that extends more than even the period that the things are happening. The issue of banditry, when people cannot go to farm, is up to now affecting our inflation, when the food inflation is the most critical one that is pushing our inflation to go up. So those effects are still there. So the COVID-19 pandemic cannot, no doubt, has effect on what we are seeing in the figures that we have for the MPI result.
Looking at the breakdown, I mean, I'm a little concerned that Sokoto has as high a figure as it has. 90%, 91% I mean, that's almost the entire state. Do we have an idea why it has been as badly affected as it has?
So I think the government in Sokoto State have been trying to address this issue, not only now. If you look at most of the figures released either by Nigerian Demographic and Health Survey, NDHS, as well as some of the surveys, other surveys that we do in MBS, the pattern has always been the same for Sokoto State. The 2018-2019 poverty figure that we released, which use monetary approach, consumption expenditure approach, Sokoto State is the #1. So the issue of education is very, very critical. You know, access to health facilities is very, very critical. So when you look at out-of-school children, you have quite a number in Sokoto State. So when you look at people that complain about food insecurity, you have quite a number in Sokoto State. So putting all this together is what is pushing Sokoto to be ahead when we are looking at poverty level. The one beauty of the MPI over the monetary policy, monetary approach is that you may have means in terms of cash with you. And if you look expenditure, if you use expenditure approach, which measure how much is available to the household to consume items, you may see some household that you say they are not in poverty because they have money. But when you have money and you are suffering from health, you cannot access health facility. As far as health sector is concerned, you are in poverty in that area, even though you have money in your pocket. And we have an analogy that no matter how rich you are, if an individual member of the household is suffering from something like cancer, that household will definitely, in the long term, may go into poverty. Indeed. So that's why we need to look at all other aspects of what is bringing people into poverty, apart from monetary aspects. So that is what takes Sokoto to be #1.
Well, let's quickly take this conversation to Lagos. I know you wanted to talk about a few more states and what you found there, but I'm sure that my colleagues will also have more questions in that direction. Ayo and Bukola.
Well, most certainly, that's where I would want to start, Markwe. Thank you. So, Mr. Adeniro, speaking specifically to states and referencing a question Markwe asked earlier about what the president said when he said we should be able to take 100 million Nigerians out of poverty over 10 years. Well, you have already mentioned that he probably didn't factor in COVID-19, which happened a year after or thereabout. But looking at that, the natural question that came to my mind was, I mean, it's only natural to expect that states will collaborate with the federal government in ensuring that the poverty figures go down. Having these records now from all of the things that you have seen, yes, you mentioned that Sokoto State is trying, but I'm wondering how significant that trying was to the effect that we have the kind of figures that we have now, because there are many who will be wondering exactly what the states are doing. If it's the federal government, you are a federal government agency that is having to embark on such an exercise. Meanwhile, all of these issues are happening in the states. What could the states have done to ensure that we don't get to these kind of very scary and intimidating figures?
All right. So, thank you, Ayo. First, let me say that the process of coming up with the multidimensional poverty report that was launched yesterday is a process that involved multi-stakeholders. We have the MDAs from federal government that partner with MBS. We have development partners that are working in Nigeria that work with us to come up with the process of the survey as well as the result. And more importantly, we have the State Bureau of Statistics also involved in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of the survey. Just as Jacob just said, about a month or so ago, we had the validation of the result with the all the state surgeon generals in attendance. So it's not like federal government commissioned the survey, the state are not involved. So the state government, represented by the State Bureau of Statistics, are part and parcel of the process of the MPI. Not only that, if you look at the process that culminated into the finalization of the midterm Nigerian Development Program that is going to run from 2021 to 2025, which government is implementing now, the state government were deeply involved in it. And as I alluded to before, this MPI result is going to be policy tools, program implementation tool for not only the federal government, but also the state government. As we talk, there is a plan in place to take the result to the state government. We are going to be disseminating the outcome of this MPI at zonal level so that we bring all the state actors together in a location and present the results to them and see the area that each state needs to concentrate more if they have to take people out of poverty. The deprivation that people suffer that bring them to poverty are not the same across the state. So each state will be able to understand better which area, which sector are they supposed to concentrate and work on. So what is much important now is that there is a tool at hand available for government at the state level to use to implement program, to allocate resources, and to lift people out of poverty. Well, so using this MPI is something that can help both the federal and state government to achieve the target that the federal government has set.
Well, there are those who will still say, irrespective of all that you've said, that somehow this report indicts all the states that do not have enough for their people, so to speak, because, I mean, even though we know we'll always have poor people among us, it shouldn't be to this quantum. You wanted to cite example of a few states the other time you mentioned Bayelsa. Mr. Clem Agba earlier in the quote that we showed you mentioned the specific situation for an Ondo state, for instance, talking about education shortfalls, housing shortfalls, and stuff like that. There are those who wonder it's not that these state governments don't know that these things are there. Perhaps they may not know the quantum. So kindly help us understand exactly this one, right there in our faces. And a number of states will have such specific situations on their hands. So please go ahead and land on that example that you wanted to cite of a few states earlier, just before we went on the break. What are the peculiarities that you found out? What are the opportunities for state governments to take their people out of poverty?
So if you use monetary approach of computation of poverty, a state like Bayelsa may not come second because if you look at the amount of cash maybe available to the state government or available to the citizens in that state, they may not likely be in that position. But when you look at what the majority of South-South states have been agitating over the years in terms of deprivation, so this is coming to bear that the multidimensional poverty approach is a better measure to look at what people are going through across the state. And that is why you see, because the aspect of deprivation shock is applied, is added to the computation now. That is why we are seeing that, Bayelsa came second after Sokoto. Ondo State that came lowest. If we had used a monetary policy approach, I'm not sure Ondo State will be able to beat Lagos State. I'm not sure Ondo State will be able to beat a state like Rivers State if you are looking at monetary approach. But because we are looking at deprivation, perhaps the citizens or the people in Ondo State are not deprived in most of these things if they are provided for them, education, health, social amenities in terms of living standard, and the issue of work and shock. So if majority of the households there in Ondo State are not deprived in all these areas so much, not that they are not deprived, but not as much as we can witness in Sokoto, Bayelsa, Jigawa, Gombe. So that is what the state need to look at. That, okay, what is driving Ondo State not to be as high as Sokoto State or Bayelsa State? What other deprivation is affecting Bayelsa that make them to come second in the computation? So these are the things that state will be able to take the result, look at it critically, and go into those sectors, because they have been sectorized, which make it easy. Education sector is there, health sector is there, environment is there. When you talk about cooking fuel and all that under the living standard, they are all there for government to take and implement programs and projects in those sectors that can help them to take people out of poverty. I think that is what is in there for us, that the government at various levels will interact with the data, take the data and use it to implement program and project. That is what is key for as far as National Bureau of Statistics is concerned.
Well, indeed, Mr. Adeniran, the data is an invaluable tool for state governments, to use as a planning document, to engender development in their states. But then again, the budgets, of most states are done based on needs assessment. There was a budget presentation yesterday, and the state governor talked about how there were town planning meetings held, to get the buy-in of the people on the areas that need attention. I'd like to come to Mr. Jacob, right now. That's just an aside. The survey also talked about child poverty, and the indicators are in the area of child engagement, where children lack childhood development, and all the cognitive skills, that are required at that stage. I'd like you to speak to child poverty phenomenon at that level. What do you think is responsible, or are the enhancing factors that make this assessment go to the child, rather than the households? That should also be the environment where the child should be assessed. I wonder if you understand the question.
Yeah, good morning to Lagos. I think one important aspect to highlight about both the Nigeria Multidimensional Poverty Index and also about the linked Child Multidimensional Poverty Index that you just mentioned is that we do indeed use factors that affect everyone in the household equally in order to identify deprivations. So for the child poverty measure that is linked to the Nigeria MPI, we're not ignoring all the factors that my Oga, the statistician general, has just mentioned as well, that affect many people across the household, including adults and children. What we do is we additionally uncover deprivations that affect the youngest of the population, so those who should be prioritized in order to break these intergenerational cycles and to make sure that these deprivations don't continue into the future. This does not ignore all the living standards related deprivations children will also experience. So if the household doesn't have drinking water, if the household has housing materials that are inappropriate, this will also be counted and then in the numbers affect what the child poverty figures tell us.
Then why are the children assessed in isolation? Why isn't it linked to the household?
So we have both the Nigeria MPI, where we do have disaggregation of the results for all children 0 to 17, which is just a tool for us to unpack these headline figures that we have. We disaggregate not only by zones, by states, by districts, by urban and rural areas, we also disaggregate by age in order to show who are the people who live in those households that are identified as being multidimensionally poor by the Nigeria MPI. The linked MPI for children adds on to this, and it provides additional insights for the youngest in order to make sure that policies that are particularly tailored to alleviate child deprivations can also take into view these additional deprivations that the very youngest are facing.
Right. Mr. Adeniran, you were explaining, the point about multidimensional poverty earlier on, and you said something about even if one has a lot of money in the pocket and the health facilities are not available within the environment, then again the individual is not able to access health care. But on the flip side, if the individual has enough money in the pocket, he should be able to have options, to access health care besides what the government has provided. So in that regard, isn't this enhancing the outcome of this survey, enhancing the inequalities in the Nigerian economy?
So what the MPI tried to do there is to actually address this inequality that you have mentioned. If we don't take cognizance of the access to health facility, which state that international standard is that the health facility should be within 30 minutes walk to where you stay. So if the facility is not available at that range, and you have to, because you have money, you have to travel like 10 kilometers to get to the health facility. You are deprived in that area because it's not everybody that will have money to travel to such a distance before they get treatment or access to facility. So to that extent, if MPI has not looked at the access to health under the access to health facility under the health dimension, we would have been able to differentiate this inequality that you are talking about, because we will have lumped everybody into the cycle of monetary view of measuring the poverty. So it is actually in order to be able to see that taking inequality into consideration, there are many people that are in poverty when you look at access to health facilities.
Just a quick one on that.
The one that you picked.
On the same issue, perhaps a little more reference to children. Earlier in the year, I think sometime in May, a UNICEF report said in Nigeria, 53.9% of children are defined as multidimensionally poor, that is experiencing deprivation in at least 3 dimensions at the same time. But in your report, it says 67.5% of children between 0 to 17 are multidimensionally poor. Now, it would seem like the figures are getting worse.
So the difference here is that, just as the question that was asked before, that the children, are they not belonging to a particular household? So the national MPI, where the household are poor, the children 0 to 17, as well as 0 to 4 years, that are residing in those households that we have calculated in the national MPI, are also deemed to be in poverty. It is in addition to that we now take child survival and development as a separate dimension for the children. so that those children that are not covered in the national MPI households can be looked into deep down and also capture them and add them to the figure that we have in the national MPI. For instance, in the national MPI, the issue of breastfeeding is not considered as either a dimension or as an indicator. But under the child MPI, we are looking at breastfeeding, exclusive breastfeeding. We know it's a critical factor for children, especially those aged 0 to under the age of 5 years. So that is considered. Where the child is lagging or lacking breastfeeding, adequate breastfeeding, we classify that child in that household as being in poverty. We also look at playground in terms of looking at educational development of the child. Playground where children can play with toy, with something that they can develop their brain at that tender age. So if it is not available to them, that particular child is deprived in that area. So we have other immunization. Immunization coverage is not in the national MPI, both dimension and indicator. But for the child MPI, immunization is added so that we'll be able to capture more indicators, more targets directly towards the children. And these children that are now classified as being in poverty under this child MPI are now added to the national MPI, and that is why we have that number increasing to that level.
Well, I do know that this is supposed to be a discussion stimulant. I imagine that part of the reason why this report has been published is also so that Nigerians can have these discussions around the issues of poverty, and especially now that we are in an electoral season, that perhaps they will take to task those who seek to govern them at the different levels, what they intend to do about these figures and ensure that they come down. We'll see how that conversation goes in the following days. But gentlemen, we have to thank you both for coming on Sunrise Early this morning and for being bold enough to be able to put this report together. So thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Early this morning. Mr. Adeyemi Adeniran is the Statistician General and the CEO of the National Bureau of Statistics. And Mr. Jacob Dirksen is a Research and Policy Officer, Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, that's the OPHI, at the University of Oxford. Gentlemen, thank you once again for coming on Sunrise Early this morning.
Thank you.
Let's take a break at this moment, and we'll be back to discuss just another issue which will be of concern to you. Please stay with us. Mr. Awal Musarraf Sajani joins us now, and we're about to talk about the voter registration display. Do not forget that just a few days ago, we were reminded it was 100 days to the elections. It's now less than 100 days to the elections, and INEC is following that timetable. Right now, we're currently where we're displaying the voters register at not just polling units, but also online. A number of people have been able to go online to check, well, not just to look at their own, but also look at other people's own. And they're supposed to do that. That is what INEC seeks to achieve by that. But it would seem that that understanding has not quite been there, because it seems to be raising some controversy as people are beginning to point out some irregularities. Will this have anything whatsoever on the confidence of people in INEC to be able to conduct credible elections? How can INEC avoid this and also continue to emphasize that that's precisely why it has displayed the voters register? We have with us, well, I already introduced him earlier, Awal Musarraf Sajani, to help shed a little more light. He's the chairman of the Transition Monitoring Group. You're welcome once again to Sunrise Elite this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Were you surprised when you heard some of the, will I say, objections or some of the observations that people had begun to make over the display of the voter register, not just online, but also at polling units? Did it come to you as a surprise, or was it expected?
No, it didn't come as any surprise, given the desperation by some politicians in this country to do everything possible to undermine the credibility of the 2023 general election and also dash the hope of Nigerians who are yearning for positive change by ensuring that we have free, fair, and credible election in this country. So those set of politicians will connive with people that are working in INEC to undermine even the effort of INEC itself. We can confirm that the leadership of INEC is determined to ensure that this election is conducted in free, fair, and credible as we all envisage. However, some of these disturbing issues that are emerging is affecting the confidence that Nigerians are having. You will recall that this same suspicion or this same allegation were raised some months ago by political parties, by the Association of Political Parties in Nigeria, where they allege that at least in Imo State, some names were imported, and now the allegation they had made at that time, maybe perhaps it was not fully taken serious. But if incidents like this are happening, it means that the allegation they made was actually potential enough to be investigated.
Now, when you say politicians, unscrupulous politicians who don't want the process to go smoothly, are you talking about those who are raising the objections, or perhaps those who were involved in getting these names that ought not to be on the register?
No, those who connive in INEC to register people that are not supposed to be registered.
Okay.
Those are the people I'm referring to. Those are the desperate politicians who will do everything possible to bribe their way, to impose themselves, to doctor and manufacture names that are not supposed to be in the register. And I'm only reminding you about the allegation made by
CUPP.
Yeah, CUPP, that they had credible intelligence or credible evidence that some politicians have actually doctored the register. Now, with what we are seeing, clearly you cannot dismiss those allegations, especially when they were not fully investigated to establish, the allegation or to reject that. And that's why every time one issue like this comes, it is important we pay attention. Secondly, I think those who perpetrated this act of unpatriotism and also attempt to undermine the collective aspiration of Nigerian people to see that we have election that will at least give us some, confidence that Nigerians voted what they wanted, and also not, to have what they usually, have as their rigging platform. The INEC must do everything possible. First, like I said, we commend them for even displaying the register in time for Nigerians to begin to note and identify these anomalies, so that this can be rectified as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think the very first question I was asking was whether or not people were even aware that that was the purpose for the display. Because when a number of people saw this, they began to say, oh, see INEC, see what you did. And I don't think they realized that that was precisely the reason why INEC displayed that voter register. Do you think that there is now sufficient awareness on the part of the public that that's precisely why INEC has displayed this, so that you can raise these objections and observations, and that the Commission can make those corrections as we head into the election?
So these are part of what Transition Monitoring Group and other election observation group in Nigeria have been, doing with INEC, interacting with them, pointing out areas that can enhance the credibility of the election, and also, instill confidence on Nigerians that the INEC is determined to really have an election that will be acceptable to Nigerians. So the display, it is exactly to help identify those anomalies. However, many Nigerians were not that much aware, and that's why Transition Monitoring Group is out there sensitizing and mobilizing Nigerians to even go and collect their PBC, to go and check to see whether their details are correct, whether they have any credible suspicion that certain things were not done. And we're happy that INEC has done that. The next thing is not just to let those people who perpetrated this act, they have to be punished. They have to be identified within the INEC, and they have to completely be removed to give more confidence on Nigerians. If there are people within the system that have helped to do this chua-chua, definitely they must be fished out and be removed from any sensitive place. Or in fact, actually, they should be sanctioned for trying to undermine the credibility of the 2023 election, that all Nigerians and even international community are putting their hope that Nigeria this time around, based on all the effort that civil society organization and even the government have done, particularly the INEC, to see that we have an amendment in the Electoral Act that will give more, or rather boost more confidence on Nigerians that this time around there will not be that much regular occurrences of electoral malpractices, and the process will be more smoother and better. So with the amendment into the Electoral Act, Nigerians have developed confidence that this time around we're going to have at least better election than what we used to have. But like I said, just desperate politicians who want to make sure that at all costs they must win the election, because for them it's a business, it's commercialization of governance. So they will make sure that they pumped resources, violence, intimidation, harassment to ensure that they get their way. However, if we are practicing democracy and if we want to leave a legacy, if we want to lead by example, as we always say we are giant of Africa, we must demonstrate the capacity to be able to organize an election that is free of all these problems that we have been having since 1999 when we started conducting election in this country. So that's why...
Yes, you talked about, sorry to interrupt your thoughts there, but you've talked about how those who, INEC needs to bring to book, those who perpetrated this. INEC has been speaking. They have said that they're going to do just that they intend to investigate and also bring those who did that into reckoning. But I want to ask you, knowing our elections, this is not the first time that objections around underage voting have come up. We've seen that, in almost every election cycle. And oftentimes, we know that elections in many communities are a communal effort. If there is rigging in a particular polling unit, it most likely has been done by the community. And in some instances, we're coming from that tradition whereby, there is collusion amongst politicians and even members of the community in certain instances. And in some places, we do know that the lives of INEC officials who try to follow the guidelines as laid down by INEC has been in jeopardy if they're trying to, follow stricter sensu what INEC says in those kinds of communities. So rather than condemn them, would we say that it is too early to reach that condemnation, or we're being too hasty in reaching that condemnation when we haven't even found out the circumstances under which this sort of registration was done, knowing that with this new system, it is going to be impossible to get away with it, and that these names and faces were going to be weeded out anyway?
We must be harsh and hard on those who want to draw us back. Any person or group of a person that attempted to undermine the collective aspiration of Nigerians to have free, fair, credible election in this country, we cannot spare that kind of group of people. The desperation we are seeing is not to come and serve and do good governance in this country. It is simply to continue to divert public taxpayers' money. It is continue to throw us into poverty. You just finished having a session here on poverty. Nigeria is facing security challenges, is facing poverty, issue. It's virtually all the indices in this whole of the development, paradigm. Nigeria is getting back. It's going down, down, down. So we need to have, and in democracy, it is only through election of people who are competent, credible, who have track record, that you can be able to fix the problem at local, state, and national level. So therefore, we must be concerned when we see things that are going to undermine that process, that road that will lead us to having such kind of thing. And secondly, we want to really have a greater departure from what it used to be, where people, because of their money or because of whatever they do, they control and manipulate the electoral system in the country. That is why we cannot be soft on those people. Secondly, we are INEC is a friend to civil society, and civil society is happy to be working with INEC because they have listened to civil society. They are listening to civil society to point out so many errors. There are so many advices that civil society do give to INEC publicly and privately to enhance the credibility of the system and restore confidence. And you can agree with me that because of this relationship that INEC is having with civil society, many lapses in the previous election, INEC had worked toward addressing that. And if we notice some people within the INEC are also undermining this effort within the leadership of INEC, and for INEC to have an election that we all be proud of, we must point out to them. Remember, this new electoral act will help, like Ratley, to eliminate all this duplication, underage voting, and so many things. But then the people, the Nigerian people must also play an important role. You talk about, a community where election happens and rigging is done. Sometimes the community have no role because when they connive with security, when they connive with the INEC official, when they brought in, talks for violence, what will people who are peace-loving, who already are initiated in poverty, underdevelopment, and confusion, what will they do? So that is why Transition Monitoring and many other civil society organizations working on election have been embarking on voter education, have been embarking on ensuring that we have, non-violence election. Sadly, as you can see on this campaign going on, there's so much intolerance, there's so much, disrespectful, even the rules of even the campaigning itself. There's so much harassment, intimidation, simply because some people say, this is what I want. And that's what democracy talks about. So Transition Monitoring Group, along together with many Nigerian civil society organizations working to ensure that we have free electoral violence in this country, are working very hard to sensitize, mobilize, educate Nigerians to stay away from being misused by those desperate politicians who just want to get in there to continue to loot, to continue to create confusion, create, ethnic, religious division in this country, rather than harnessing the potential of the people that we have, especially the young people in this country, for development, and also demand accountability. They don't want accountability. They don't want Nigerians to unite. They will always bring ethnic, religious, geographical, and political differences so that we'll continue as young people to be victims of each other. No, that is why civil society is out there sensitizing, mobilizing, educating Nigerians. And I must commend Scale. It's a USAID-funded project that are supporting civil society organizations to ensure that they deepen the understanding of the electoral process and also preach non-violence election. They are one of the major groups that are supporting many civil society organizations to work at community level with community leaders, religious leaders, even the political leaders and the young people to make sure that the 2023 election is done in a peaceful atmosphere that will not bring in about this violence that it's always characterized the election, in this country. So if we find any credible evidence that some people within INEC have perpetuated this thing, like it was alleged by the political parties, spokesperson some couple of months, and now we are seeing some of this thing happening, we must not ignore it. It must be investigated. And the only way INEC can investigate this, it is also when there's a pressure from civil society, from the media, from the community to do the needful. Otherwise, as you know, some powerful people are there still determined to control and manipulate even the INEC itself. So it is only the civil society who have continued to be conscious of the society for good governance. Civil society organizations are not actually beneficiary of even the democracy itself because they do all this work with their body, with their soul, with their thinking, with their everything, having sleepless night. At the end of the day, what they are demanding is just good governance, transparent and accountable leadership in this country that will uplift us from poverty, from hopelessness, unemployment, and the violence we have. That's all civil society groups are asking in this country. But these politicians who benefit, get government privileges, get all sort of lucrative, and all sort of unlimited enjoyment without even meeting the limited expectation of governance in this country for development, they will still be abusing you or even getting dogs to attack you. But we will not surrender, because if you surrender, if you leave what we are doing, they will be comfortable. So if the work we are doing will make them uncomfortable for their impunity, we will continue to do. We've already donated our life to this struggle. For many of us, in the last 28, 30 years, we have been on struggle for social justice, democratization in this country. So we will not back down. We will continue because we believe that we have a fundamental right as Nigerians to demand for accountability, to demand for good governance and good election that will lead us to good governance. Election must deliver good governance in this country.
Let me flip this to Lagos now. Buki.
Yes, thank you, Mokwe. Mr. Rafsanjani, you speak glowingly of the partnership between INEC and the civil society. And, that is the expectation for the delivery of, credible elections in 2023. And, just as you started, you also talked about the confidence, that civil society has reposed in the commission to do just that, deliver transparent elections. But with this concern about underage voters and identified, by many Nigerians who have gone on the website of the commission, don't you think you've been a bit in a hurry to absolve the commission? If we presented it in a more vivid illustration, I imagine if you were the CEO of a company, if an intruder gained access, shouldn't the intruder have been checked at the entrance, but this intruder has gone all the way, to the summit of the commission in this case. So haven't you been in a hurry to absolve the commission?
Well, it's not absolving them from anything. If we have established any credible evidence that the INEC itself as a body connives with politicians to undermine our collective aspiration and yearning to have free, fair, credible election, we will speak out. And like I said, we meet with them regularly. We point out errors. We talk, we point out mistakes and advise them on, fixing those things. And we can, give, evidence that so many instances of the recommendation we have provided, INEC abused them. However, like we said, if there are any evidence that those people within INEC connive to do this, INEC must push them, punish them, sanction them, in fact, remove them completely from INEC, because they will continue to undermine the confidence on Nigerians, and they will actually, revalidate, or rather, cause more confusion for Nigerians not even believe in INEC, after we have done everything to mobilize them to go and register in the first place. So there's nothing like observing, INEC on this. Once civil society, because civil society want to work with evidence, want to work with fact. Today, if tomorrow we have verified and we find out that any INEC commissioner or official is involved, we will come here, not only condemn that, insist that there must be punishment. And that's why we are saying even now they should identify them, fish them out, sanction them, and remove them, so that anybody who try to mortgage this desire of Nigerians, because Nigerians are tired. They are tired of this poverty. Democracy is not about poverty. It's not about insecurity. It's not about lack of employment. It's not about hopelessness and bullying and intimidation. No. Democracy is an opportunity for Nigerians to participate in the socio-economic development of our country through electoral process, to bring in people that are determined, that are ready, that are competent, that have track record at local, state, and national level to provide quality leadership that will lead us to having good governance and sustainable development. We are suffering in this country. Nigerians cannot afford anything now. Look at our school. Because of the wickedness of some bad leaders in this country, even our lecturers who have been sacrificing to teach the nation technology, science, and administration and everything, they are disturbing them. They are not even giving them their salary. And Nigerians, they just really want to have an election with the new people, with a commitment that can help address issues of education, collapse in the health sector, collapse of the security sector, and be able to have more prosperity, because we have so much leakages in the country, and the current leadership appears to have been really tired and maybe lost ideas on how to galvanize the country. So let us have a fresh blood of people that will come who can only come through having a credible, free, fair, and credible election. And if there are people who are trying to draw us back to continue in such kind of misery, we would definitely, as civil society, mobilize, conscientize, educate people to make sure that they make a right decision so that we can get out of this quagmire we find ourselves.
Mr. Rafsanjani, indeed, the demand is that INEC, identifies these people who are in cahoots with politicians, as you say, to introduce ineligible voters into the electoral process. And INEC has responded by saying that Nigerians should visit the website and help it clean up the process. But how confident are you that INEC would, go the whole hog to identify these questionable people of questionable character in the commission, considering the fact that months ago the CUPP also identified, some strange names in the register in some parts of the country, and weeks down the line, Nigerians are still waiting for the commission, to identify these people and bring them to book. How confident are you that the commission will do anything in this regard?
So the truth is that this must be a collective work by INEC and other relevant agencies, as well as civil society and community, as well as political and religious leaders in this country. Because if we just leave it, assuming you just leave it only to INEC without the pressure to even do that, those powerful, untouchable, politicians who always, micromanage and control governance system and electoral system with their manipulation, with the use of violence, with the use of all sorts of intimidation, the INEC on its own may not be able to succeed. So we need the collective pressure. We need this awareness. We need Nigerians to be speaking. It should not be just a set of, some people that will be talking so that they are being seen only as enemy. No, it is our collective responsibility as responsible, patriotic Nigerians. Look, in some country, all these things are not even happening, cannot even happen. In some country, you even vote and send your ballot, box through mails. But in Nigeria, because the issue is not about serving, it is about, primitive accumulation. It is about using it for impunity. That is why you see they are making this thing do or die, because once you are there, overnight, you are elected, whether as a councillor or chairman or House of Rep or State Assembly or governor or whatever, you find yourself, you have become billionaire. So that is why you see this competition of desperation, so that people will come and steal more and subject us to poverty and continue to create enmity between the, so-called, young people. Look, we must commit ourselves to having a credible election that will deliver good governance in this country. That is the benefit of democracy. That will make Nigeria and Nigerians move forward and be able to say that we are in democracy. Like I said, democracy must deliver peaceful coexistence, must deliver justice, must deliver fairness, must deliver a system that will make you feel as a Nigerian to move anywhere freely without being harassed or intimidated or being called names. That's what democracy must listen. And democracy must ensure that the inequality in the society that is making it difficult even for women to excel, for young people to excel, it must change. This democracy we have been fighting, it must happen in this country in a manner that is really, holding the tenet of democracy, or democratic tenet that Nigerians are yearning for. We cannot surrender. We cannot be hopeless and leave few clique looters to continue to give us bad, situation in this country. So that is why we must commit to ensuring that we have free, fair, and credible elections. So we're putting, our eyes on what is going on within the INEC and other political parties.
Indeed. And so it is no retreat, no surrender.
No.
Our democracy must deliver.
Exactly.
I have to thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Early this morning, Mr. Alwa Musa Rafsanjani. Wears many hats, but the most important hat he wears right now for this electoral season is chairman of the Transition Monitoring Group. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Early this morning. Well, that's how we'll have to wrap up the program today. We've given you enough food for thought. First was that 133 million Nigerians in poverty. They need to be taken out of poverty. And how are we going to achieve that? Through our electoral process. And that's what Mr. Sujani has been emphasizing and harping on. We all have a responsibility and a duty towards that. So think about it and see how you can play a role. Thank you for watching this morning. I'm Maokwe Ogunyusuf.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for sharing your day with us. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo.
Don't forget, everything starts from the local government. Poverty, education, development, voting. So please do your bit. I'm Aya Makinde. Have a wonderful rest of your day.